guys, it's Elle. It's definitely been a while since I uploaded something new, huh? 7 months, jeez. The last video I posted was in November of last year, where I did my first story time and drew all of my Animal Crossing villagers as people, and the algorithm treated it very badly, so that took the wind out of my sails and discouraged me from uploading anything new for a long time. On top of that, at the same time last year and early this year, I was having a lot of problems with my audio driver that was causing my computer to get blue screens and crash on me all the time, which made it really unreliable to work with, especially since some of my files were getting corrupted when crashes would happen. But fortunately, that problem has been resolved, and I've been able to use this computer comfortably again. As I mentioned in my New Year's video, my very first computer died on me, and I basically have 10 years worth of files stuck on there. At the time of me making this video, I still haven't been able to recover these files, which is really stressful since I have a bunch of unfinished videos as well as art and documents about my various projects that I can't access, and I kind of depend on them if I want to do any kind of serious work on my stories that I created before 2020, specifically and especially The Caged Underworld and The Orchard House. I'm just in this really uncomfortable situation where I'm relying on other people who have the know-how and resources to help me with my computer problems, but doing so isn't a high priority for them, but it's already been almost 2 years and I'm really scared about this video underperforming again, so I'm trying to come up with video ideas that will allow me to upload on a regular schedule without burning myself out, so I can stay on the algorithm's good side, which makes my current circumstances about not being able to access old videos I started even scarier at the moment. But I really don't want to go on any longer without uploading something new, so I just have to work with what I have right now, and hopefully my computer issues will be resolved sometime this year, maybe, question mark. And since it's been so long since I last made a video, I thought it would be best to make something where I would try and reconnect with you all, since quite a few things have changed in the past few months, and I wanted to address a few things that have been updated about my project since I made my very first video that I rebooted the channel with, so let's get started. When 2022 began, I decided to post my artist New Year's resolutions on Instagram, and since it's the middle-ish of the year, I thought this would be a good time to check in and see how I've been doing with the goals I set for myself. In my original post, I said that if I could get even 5 of these done, then I would consider this a success, so let's see if I was able to accomplish that in the first 6 months of the year. One of my resolutions was to be more active across all social media platforms, and apart from me trying to revive my YouTube channel again, I have been making an effort to post more on Twitter, Tumblr, and Ko-fi. The latter is my new digital storefront where you can buy my zines. I decided to take down my store and fee shop since I almost never go on there. And even though my reach hasn't been impressive like on Instagram, which is where I post my art by default, I'll still give myself a point on that since I've been more active on those sites than I have been these past 2 years. Next up, right at the top, is pay back my art debt, 3 exclamation points. At the time, I needed to draw 2 commissions, CGs for a visual novel and half of an art tray. The commissions are all done and the visual novel got scrapped, so there's not really anything I can do about that, and I still need to work on the art tray. So even though I'm making decent progress, I'm not at a point where I can completely check off that resolution. I tend to have a really hard time staying motivated when I'm creating any kind of art that isn't for a story I created, which makes sense since making my own comics and manga was the reason behind me learning how to draw in the first place, but it's still kind of frustrating since it isolates me from the rest of the art scene. Participate in more Draw This in Your Style events and monthly challenges, and experiment with new techniques. I was able to do both of these things, and I'm covering them together because I ended up inadvertently combining them. So, remember earlier this year when that Princess Peach concept art got released online and there were a bunch of people on Twitter redrawing her prototype design in their style? I hopped on the bandwagon myself, and since I really needed to fill out my old neglected sketchbook that I started in 2018 and still haven't finished, I decided to draw my piece traditionally. Most of my microns were dried out, and all that's left are a bunch of 08s, which were too thick to use for line art, so out of necessity, I decided to try out a different coloring style where you erase most but not all of your original graphite sketch and then apply the colors on top of that using markers and colored pencils. And for a technique I've never tried before, it went surprisingly fast, and I'm really happy with the final result. I think I want to try more of this more often in the future. Then I found this really cool Cosmic Mermaid Week prompt, and I really wanted to participate, so I used the opportunity to try out some different coloring styles and brushes that I never used before. I was only able to get 3 done, but then depression hit me like Will Smith, and I suddenly had no motivation to participate beyond that, but it's better than nothing. Apart from that, I've also been trying to learn how to crochet. I don't know how much that does or doesn't blend in with the Try New Art Styles resolution, since crochet is obviously a different form of art from drawing a picture, but I've always been really interested in amigurumi ever since I was a kid, and I've really been motivated to explore other creative outlets that leaves you with a tangible object you can actually interact with in a 3D space, and I just happen to have all the supplies on hand already. My friend offered to walk me through the basics, do video calls on Discord, and I've also been watching Club Crochet videos so I don't have to keep pestering her. I stopped at the point where you increase in the round because I kept getting confused, but so far I feel pretty accomplished with the 2 practice crafts I've made, and it's helping me feel confident enough to keep going and hopefully start making my own amigurumi in the future. Oh, and this is more of a technical side of experimenting with new techniques since it has more to do with drawing tools than developing artistic skill, but I got Easy Canvas for my birthday, which allows you to use your iPad as a pen display on your computer, which taught me how to use a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that I had to set up with the virtual buttons, and it really helped speed up my workflow. I kind of already forgot what life was like without them. I drew this entirely in the free demo for the program to get a feel for it, and all the coloring was also done using gradient maps, so that was fun to experiment with. I also found some interesting methods of adding 3D backgrounds from Clip Studio Paint to black and white manga pages that make them look less out of place, since that's kind of a pet peeve of mine when I'm reading webtoons and stuff, so I'm looking forward to playing around with that some more. Okay, try out new art styles, for real this time. So around 2018-ish sort of time, I was working a lot on my Magical Girl fanime / manga series, Heirloom Star, and I planned on presenting the story in 2 parts, Heirloom Star Stellar Adventure, which is the main story, and Heirloom Star Strangers, which was a prequel arc set 17 years before Stellar Adventure and focused on a different group of characters that only got a little bit of screen time in the main story. And because the events of Strangers took place in 1995, I had an ambitious goal of animating the entire series to make it look as close to an authentic retro anime as I humanly could using digital art tools. I'll talk more about Heirloom Star and what's changed about it later on in this video, but I've been working a lot on Space Drops development in the past year. Yes, that's coming back. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I really wanted to do the retro anime aesthetic for this project. Unlike Heirloom Star, where I was trying to replicate a more 90s shoujo anime style, for Space Drops I'm aiming for more rounder and cartoony 80s anime style. Rumiko Takahashi and Bug Tehani are definitely 2 of my biggest style inspirations in that regard. You may have also seen past artwork where I tried to draw in a more Western cartoon style, but I decided not to try to pursue that anymore since I was trying too hard to imitate other people's styles because I didn't really know how to develop my own style. And I realized I would prefer to incorporate more Western design philosophy into my normal anime style. I've always really admired artists like Tasuko Nagano and Hiroyuki Imaishi, who draw in a style that's easily identifiable as anime while very clearly having bespoke Western cartoon influences that make their art and characters a lot more expressive, and that's really what I want my own art style to look like, which I think will come out a lot more naturally to me than trying to force myself to draw in a different style out of some self-imposed obligation. I still want I'm the Sidekick to be my first proper comic that I come out with, and I'm using that as an opportunity to establish the kind of art style I want to have going forward by paying special attention to make each character design look really distinct and incorporate the style elements I want my art to have. And it's definitely been kind of painful to try unlearning 10 years worth of same face syndrome and having to keep track of details that I'm used to drawing, but I won't let that get me down. Studying more from artists I admire, I guess this is related to the previous resolution. When I did my trio of mermaid drawings, I was specifically pulling inspiration from my friend Latte Swirl's coloring style, especially the way she does hair highlights, so that was a fun break from my normal coloring style, and I think it paid off in the end. I recently discovered Savannah Alexandra's YouTube channel and have been putting the tips she gave in her vintage style filter and Procreate video about master studies to use, particularly with my older manga, so I can get my art for space drops looking as accurate as possible. Since I'm preparing for I'm the Sidekick, I've been analyzing a lot of page and panel compositions whenever I read a manga or a webcomic and try to imagine what the same page would look like if I drew it in my own style. Other than that though, I haven't been quite as faithful with this resolution as I would like to be. I have tried to do some character designs replicating Ruiko Matsuzuki's art style for a fangen I'm working on with my friend, but that was done last year, so I don't think it counts. I noticed in a way I've been applying this mentality a lot to studying different stories I read and trying to pick apart narrative decisions the author made, why certain characters in an ensemble cast have the personality or hobbies that they do, and how that has an effect on the plot, which I think has been helping me improve as a writer, as now it's making me more aware of how I tend to include certain scenes in my stories and write characters in a specific way, just because I felt like including that kind of scene or character without really considering what kind of impact they could have on the story as a whole. Up next is have an organized workspace. This year I finished the gargantuan task of re-downloading and sorting through every single tool and material I got from the Clip Studio Asset Store, which I'm insanely happy to finally have done. I did some rearranging to my desk as well, and while it's not quite as tidy as I would like it to be, I have a pretty clear image of where everything is located, so I consider this a success. Moving on to create a separate account for fandom content, which is just a roundabout way of saying make an alt account for my Danganronpa rare pair so I don't completely alienate my Instagram followers. Basically, last year I outed myself as a Shiromara shipper, and I plan to make another account as kind of a safe space for me to post additional content for them, and the account has been made, but I'm not quite ready to provide a link to it just yet. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. And finally, for now, take this as a thing that happened off hiatus and release I'm the Sidekick. So in August of last year, I put my bi-weekly Tapas webcomic on hiatus since I was dealing with burnout and tech problems. Not just the computer crashing stuff I mentioned earlier, but my Apple Pencil was having a lot of battery issues and it needed to be replaced at the same time. So there was a short time where I wasn't able to do digital art at all last year. I did take the webcomic off hiatus in early February this year, and it's been uploading regularly since then, and I was even able to have a buffer going again, which is a very nice change of pace from when I was literally drawing episodes from start to finish the day before the next update was supposed to go live. And the Sidekick, on the other hand, I'm definitely still in the planning stage for my one-shot superhero manga, adjusting the script, working on character designs and model sheets, things like that. I'm not sure how much of that is stalling or just trying not to jump into creating a finished story too soon, but I've definitely been getting a lot of new ideas that make the story way better than it was a few months or even a few weeks ago, so I can't be mad at the progress I'm making to improve the project, even if it is taking me some time to come up with these ideas. So that just leaves two resolutions: practice animation more often and design new characters for fun, not just to create an OC for a story project. My tech problems made it impossible to do any kind of animation since I don't have the patience to try and do it traditionally, and while I do have some characters that are self-contained and not part of a larger project, I actually haven't drawn them out yet, so I don't think it counts. I guess my mermaid trio and the girl I drew to test out Easy Canvas kind of count now that I think about it. Even though I wanted to create characters that have their own personality and backstory despite not being part of a larger narrative. I guess I can give myself half a point for that. So, did I succeed in hitting my minimum of 5 New Year's resolutions? Out of 12 resolutions, I got 9 completed, giving myself half points on 2 of them since I haven't really signed the sidekick and didn't completely follow through on designing new characters for fun. I still feel like there's a lot I could improve on, so I'm not going to stop there just because I reached my quota. I want to keep learning new things and trying to be as productive as possible, and I really want to have gone even farther on fulfilling my goals by the end of 2022. I think that's everything I wanted to say about my artist resolutions, so let's move on to specific project updates, starting with I'm the Sidekick. Apart from the new ideas I've been getting to flesh out the story, not much has changed since my video explaining my manga roadmap. I did change the name of the city to New Pondra City, and Captain Rhapsody's name has been changed to Captain Zeus. I thought this new name was a better description of his powers and his personality, plus I kept getting him mixed up with Captain Rainbow before, so I'm really glad I settled on a different name for him, even if it makes my original synopsis video outdated. Moving on to the Little Mermaid Memories of Moo, which I'm happy to say has been given a lot more development since my last video, and I have a much clearer idea about what the story is really, besides just there's an undersea mafia instead of a kingdom. The basic premise is that all 7 seas once had their own mermaid guardians who possessed magical singing powers that they used to maintain balance in the kingdoms they presided over. The last guardian remaining is our main character, Caspian, who lives in the Pacific Ocean with her mother Calypso, a mermaid with limited magical powers of her own, and her best frenemy, Cerulean, a seahorse merman with a single-minded obsession with food. Crime is running rampant throughout the 7 seas, and only a mermaid guardian's magic is enough to put an end to the corruption and violence. But despite Calypso's best efforts to train Caspian on how to use her powers by taking singing lessons, Caspian refuses to cooperate with her mother, and her only goal is to swim above the surface and be among people, ever since she was a child and first learned of the existence of humankind after discovering the ruins of the land of Mu. I have some concept art sketches of Caspian when I was planning out her design. I know I want her to be based around a specific kind of fish, but I'm not sure which one that is just yet. Now that I'm researching different fish species, I'm kind of leaning toward either a princess parrotfish or a reef squirrelfish, but don't hold me accountable to that. Personality-wise, she's on par with your typical archetypal, stubborn and selfish, fiery red-haired anime girl who may or may not be voiced by Megumi Hayashibara. Calypso is still a mystery to me, and Cerulean is basically a total himbo. For what it's worth, there won't be any focus on love or romance or anything like that. The story is going to go in a whole different direction. I just thought I'd bring it up here so people don't have unrealistic expectations. Next up, Kirameki Dream Nights. I don't really have anything particular to say about this project other than it's a pretty big story with a sizable cast, and it's probably going to take some time for me to properly flesh everything out, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. Since the manga is about magical girls traveling across different dreamscapes, I thought it would be fun to do the entire story in color and use different palettes and coloring styles to represent different dreams, and I'm getting excited planning out different aesthetics for different scenes. Even though I don't have many updates for Kirameki Dream Nights, I have been working on it a lot behind the scenes. But the exact opposite can be said for my other Magical Girls series, Heirloom Star. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I think it's time for the story to be shelved. And by that, I mean completely dismantling the story and characters and applying the ideas I had for it into other projects of mine, as opposed to just canceling it outright. Ever since I first created the story, I had a really hard time developing the plot and the cast in a way that made sense for the narrative, and I thought that this would fix itself if I kept developing the story further and working more on polishing it up. But no matter what I did, it just felt like this weird mishmash of ideas that I spitballed together that didn't make it very fun to write, which would have made it even less fun to actually watch or read. I think I like the basic idea behind Heirloom Star. It's magical girls in outer space. What more could you ask for? But that didn't necessarily translate into enthusiasm for writing it, even though I was having fun imagining things like character designs, transformation and battle scenes, and what music would be used for certain moments. But in terms of actually creating the story, nothing was really working or solidifying. I had to actually stop and think back to what was the original idea I had that inspired Heirloom Star, and if continuing the project would allow me to effectively convey that idea. My inspiration was to have a teenage magical girl who just got her powers fight alongside her mother, who was a magical girl years before without any time travel shenanigans. And I realized that in the years since I got that idea, I had gotten to know another comic artist who was already using that theme for their magical girl tokusatsu webcomic Star Rangers Magical Space Cadet Squad. So I was already seeing the kind of story I wanted to see but wasn't able to write for myself. I mentioned in my manga roadmap video that I wanted to tell the story of Heirloom Star simultaneously as both a fanime and manga, but it felt greedy for me to do the art for both. And I had an idea of what I wanted to do to get around that for the manga version, but wasn't able to go into detail about it at the time since my plan relied on a lot of forces outside of my control. And since Heirloom Star isn't really a thing anymore, I can go ahead and reveal what I had in mind, which was to hire the Star Rangers artist Kagura to do the art for the manga. Their art style is super clean and attractive, and it has the added benefit of looking like an actual 90s anime, so it just happened to be a perfect fit already for what I had in mind for Heirloom Star Strangers. My idea was to do kind of a three-way art collab thing where they would do the sketch, I would do the line art and tones, and then give coloring duties to another person just to reduce the amount of work they had to do so they would be less likely to have burnout, which would have been really cool and fun, but also really expensive. Also, while I'm gushing about Kagura, I just want to use this opportunity to thank them for tolerating my incessant rambling whenever I start gushing about Kitameki Dream Nights for literally hours on end. They're the real MVP. Last, for the 5 manga projects I brought up in my roadmap video is The Orchard House. I still have more story updates to share after this one, don't worry. Although this story definitely hasn't been shelved or cancelled, and I'm still very intent on releasing it, I'm also in the process of rebooting it into a science fantasy-ish story rather than having it be in the magical girl genre. When I first created it as Supernatural Spies back in 2007, it was more of a science fiction superhero story, but then when I entered middle school and discovered anime, I turned it into a magical girl series for no reason other being the genre I gravitated toward at the time, and it stayed in that genre in every one of its reboots since then. Looking back on it now, I'm beginning to realize that the only reason I set it in that genre was because of a weeaboo motivated rule of cool and not because it really benefited the story for it to be in that genre. So now I'm trying to come up with a new scenario and plot that still honors my past ideas from old drafts, while also hopefully being more satisfying and making more sense. I noticed that a lot of characters had random traits that I would just throw at them to see what stuck in some misguided attempt to make them more nuanced, so I need to rework some of the characters and their personalities as well, and maybe also cut and paste some characters that no longer fit into that story anymore since there's a lot of furries, but may be able to find a better home in another project of mine. Also, I need to change the title again because I didn't realize until very recently how similar it is to the Owl House, and I can't keep calling it the Orchard House anymore. It's just unacceptable. Alright, so that's everything I brought up before my manga roadmap. Now it's time to move on to other categories of different story projects. Starting, of course, with the elephant in the room, my fanime Cage Underworld, aka Most Towns Are Ghost Towns, that's been stuck in development purgatory since 2018. I recently sketched out redesigns of Kleinod and Weltram, you name Iago, by the way, and it really made me realize how much I miss these characters, and I know other people miss them too when I posted my sketches online. On Patreon, I made a public post explaining why I had been so quiet about Most Towns Are Ghost Towns, which I'm 97% sure nobody has actually read, so I'm going to share what I discussed in my post. At the beginning of 2017, I had decided to bring back one of my old stories that I canceled years ago, which would end up becoming The Orchard House. I canceled it because 1, the story was a mess, and 2, its premise was too similar to Most Towns Are Ghost Towns, which I came up with in 2013 under the name Caged Underworld, and I was more interested in exploring this new story. At the time, I believed canceling the Orchard House would be more convenient than trying to completely rewrite it, but as the years went by, I decided it was worth it to bring the Orchard House back and have it coexist with Cage Underworld, since the Cage Underworld needed a reboot of its own that would cause it to have less in common with the Orchard House. Originally, the Caged Underworld took heavy inspiration from shoujo manga such as Full Moon no Sagashite and Sailor Moon, and the main characters, Clannad and Weltron, were two Shinigami trying to reap the soul of the female protagonist Kotori Miyazawa. But at this point I realized the story was better suited for a more dark and serious premise, and Clannad and Weltron, who got the name change at that point, were ghosts living in a world that had been claimed by a global pandemic and the effect the massive influx of souls from humans who died from the outbreak had on the world. I definitely wasn't expecting an actual global pandemic to happen within the next few years, so I knew I needed to come up with another story. But at this point, none of my ideas for a new premise have been really gelling together. It hasn't been cancelled or forgotten about, and I'm not just passively waiting for inspiration to strike me either, but at this point I have a bunch of different ideas that just don't fit together, which is why this project has been placed lower on my list of priorities in favor of other projects that I have a much better understanding of and are closer to completion. The only ideas I've been getting for Most Towns Are Ghost Towns that have been sticking are mostly about Clannad and Iago's backstories and character arcs, and less about the actual story and world they belong to. But this is something I am aware of and trying to work to my advantage, but for now the story is basically stuck on a loading screen until I finally come up with a plot hook that I think would work for it, because I want to take the time to consider all of my possible ideas instead of just going with the first thing that comes to me. I think at the time I was working on Most Towns Are Ghost Towns' new story before the new decade, I was planning on depicting the story as a manga. I don't remember what my specific reasoning for that was, but it'll probably be brought back as a fanime again. I'm not sure if this counts as a spoiler or not, but since she was a lot of people's favorite character, I should probably mention that Kotori is no longer in the story and is instead a supporting character in Kirameki Dream Nights, which is honestly a way better fit for her since she really was a product of the original shoujo parody the Caged Underworld was going to be at first and didn't fit with the rest of the narrative at all once the fanime hit its stride and started heading into a more grim direction. On top of that, she wasn't really able to carry a story well, and Clannad and Weltron had way more interesting personalities than she did, so even though it was kind of a tough choice to completely remove her from the story she came from, it was definitely a choice for the better, since otherwise she probably would have been an obnoxiously cute Scrappy-Doo type character, and I'm having a lot of fun developing her in Kirameki Dream Nights. It's where she belongs. While we're on the topic of fanime, let's bring up the other elephant in the room, which is Space Drops. Yes, the story I created especially for the 2016 Weekly Fanime Challenge that never went beyond the first episode because the time crunch got way too intense. Besides my inability to keep up with animating a new video to go up every single week, I also just wasn't able to come up with a plot that was interesting enough to last 7 episodes. The story was basically about an alien named Amisa and her robot Flynn returning home for a reunion party after being sent to do space pirate stuff that we never actually got to see, only for her to accidentally end up on the wrong planet and have to go on a journey to find her family on the actual planet they're waiting for her on. So yeah, the story itself was very linear, and I couldn't think of any good ways to extend it for a full 7 episodes without arbitrarily padding it out with filler material, so I pivoted away from it for a while in favor of other projects where I had a clear idea of the story until I was able to come back to it. But oh, look how the turntables! The story has grown massively this past year, and I even have a bunch of sequels and spin-offs planned for it, to the point where I'm low-key kind of nervous about nuking the fridge if I'm not careful. If you follow me on social media, then you may have noticed that I completely changed Amisa's design, and her personality is also completely different. I was kind of worried at first that people wouldn't like the new design when I posted a side-by-side comparison, but I'm glad that doesn't seem to be the case. Honestly, so much about Space Drops has been updated from its original draft that I seriously think it requires its own video in order to explain everything, but for the most part, the entire plot has gotten a massive overhaul. There's new characters and conflicts, there's a lot of world building going on, and overall the story is shaping up to have a lot more depth and fleshing out than what was in the works for its first incarnation as a weekly fanime, while still hopefully retaining the same wacky sense of humor as the original. I feel kind of bad because part of the reason why Heirloom Star got shelved is because Space Drops was getting so much attention, and developing two retro anime inspired stories set in space wasn't that fun because of how similar and repetitive it felt, but I feel like it was a necessary change in the end. I'm so sorry, Heirloom Star, you deserve better. I do have some smaller projects that I made fleeting posts about some years ago that are also no longer being worked on anymore, so I'll just speed through these real quick before we move on to the next topic. First up, Popcorn Burglar, which was a fanime reboot of a manga concept that came up with back in high school that followed a girl who worked at the concession stand at the movie theater and was secretly a phantom thief who stole items to support her family after her father lost his job. The story is no longer being worked on, but I will be reviving the characters in different projects of mine. Next, Firewall Arata and Alice is Not a Squirrel. One is another high school manga turned fanime about a boy who entered a computer game world, and the other is a manga about a squirrel on a quest to find the wizard who cursed her by transforming her into a squirrel so she can break the curse. Both of these projects suffer from being too short and me trying to force them to be longer by padding them out, and I'm thinking of having Alice is Not a Squirrel's premise included in a different project as a single episode conflict in a much longer story. Don't know what to do about Firewall Arata since the premise has been done to death, but I don't want it to be completely abandoned either. After that, Blood and Nightstones, which is a Western-style comic about vampires set in England during the 1850s. I cannot write stories from other time periods to save my life, and this was basically an AU of the Orchard House back when it was cancelled anyway, so now that the Orchard House is coming back, I think the chances of this comic returning are pretty slim. Last is Tokyo Mimu Secret Class, which is basically a Tokyo Mimu fan manga centering around a cast of original characters. I have a really hard time writing fanfiction compared to original work, so this project is defunct as well. Alright, now that all that disappointing stuff is out of the way, it's time for the final part of this update video, which is to reveal other projects I've been working on outside of my manga roadmap and pre-existing fanime projects. Woohoo! Other than the manga I'm working on, I do have two Western-style comic projects I'm developing at the moment, with one being a comedy about a nerd and a jock who have to work together after Earth gets taken over by AI, and the other being a juvenile horror about a girl and her best friend who are trapped in a haunted nursery after things go horribly wrong while trick-or-treating. I talked earlier about my past attempts at trying to draw in a Western cartooning style, which was so I could do both the art and the story for these specific comic projects that I wanted to experiment with presenting in a different style and page layout philosophy than I normally do for my default manga style. And recently I decided it would be better to outsource the art for these comics to someone who already has an established Western cartooning style. So when the time comes for me to start working on these projects and releasing pages and stuff, I'll be on the hunt for an artist that I can commission or collaborate with. I just feel like it's a better solution than forcing myself to be an artist that I'm not, because otherwise people will be able to tell that I'm faking it and trying to draw something that I think other people would want to see me draw instead of drawing something that I actually want to draw. I also have some video game projects in development which absolutely require help in order to make them good. So yes, both my Western comic projects and my video game projects require me to hire other people in order to get them done. I do like playing games, but it's kind of a rare hobby of mine and I'm not very good at them. Plus I'm extremely picky about the kind of games I actually choose to play, so the deck is very much stacked against my favor if I think I'd be able to make anything good without reaching out to someone else. Even though I have ideas for what kind of genres I want my games to be in, most if not all of my game projects have some kind of narrative backbone attached to them, since coming up with stories is the creative form I'm most comfortable with, and I don't know jack about game mechanics, making a non-linear project that needs extra attention behind the visual and conceptual package to make it balanced and not completely broken on the technological level. I did buy RPG Maker MV several years ago, and I want to get as much mileage out of it as possible so I can get my money's worth. And even though I have game projects that are intentionally supposed to be very basic so I can get as much done as possible on my own, I'm definitely going to be asking my gamer friends for input along the way. The main video game projects I'm looking at now are The Snail's Vampire Prince, which is a dating sim visual novel that parodies vampire romance stories, an unnamed adventure game about hamsters shipwrecked on a deserted island, Magical Pizza Girl Ribbon Ruby, which is a project made for the sole purpose of having a magical girl RPG, since I feel like magical girls are criminally underrepresented in video games. And finally, for now, Octopus Soldier, which is about a group of octopods, 8-armed cephalopods, who are creating a Power Rangers inspired TV show. And I think I've covered everything I want to say for this update, so now it's time to start wrapping things up for today. Like I said, I'm really scared about uploading to YouTube again because my engagement has been so terrible, so if you could interact with this video by liking, commenting, subscribing, turning on notifications, and all that annoying cliche stuff YouTubers tell you to do these days, that would help a lot. Big thanks to everyone who stuck around until the end, and if you're still here, please let me know which of these projects stood out to you the most or what you're most excited about. See you next time!